Welcome back to the news, everyone. Once again, Microsoft have taken a bit of an L with Redfall. And this is a really sad thing. Redfall is actually the second, very full title from Arkane Austin. Okay, now Arkane overall, think of games like Deathloop, of course, Dishonored, Prey, the absolutely amazing Prey Mooncrash. They've had two main studios, and this is a very funky situation. Of course, a studio going away from what they are used to doing has happened before. Take Creative Assembly. I mean, who thought they would make Alien Isolation, one of the best horror games maybe in gaming, at the very least for that generation. So it can be fantastic for all of these different developers to branch out, to try new things, but today it has not went well. This is a game that has clashed against catalog expectations from gamers. It is one that, honestly, when you think about the type of game it is, you think about the era it was greenlit, you start to wonder, oh no, why did they take these incredible developers who made Prey and throw them into a co-op shooter? Yeah, it is pretty damn bizarre. And of course, for Microsoft, this is a game that they inherited as a part of their ZeniMax acquisition, and seemingly, rather than delay it further in order to get better reviews, they just decided to get it out the door, to just get it on Game Pass. And the reviews are not good. But thankfully I can say there is one thing that's actually got really damn good reviews, and thankfully it's the game that we made, The Pale Beyond. And I just want to say, we've got a big event coming for the game, starting on the 4th of May, that will involve a new game feature, and also a way that you can play the game for free and then transfer your save file over to the full version. You'll see more on the 4th of May over in Steam. Now that you know that, let's get into the story here. So, Redfall is published by Microsoft. It is developed by Arkane Austin. It is framed as an open-world co-op RPG shooter for between 1 and 4 people. And, of course, this is the team that made Prey. This is the second game that they have done separate from the wider team at Arkane Lyon, which is in France. And really, this is a team that is known for the immersive sim. Of course, there was Prey. There was also Prey Mooncrash, which had essentially a time loop roguelite element going on. It's a truly incredible experience that you really should play. And what's bizarre about this is a team with immersive sim pedigree, yet so many of the reviews going up to this game's release, or interviews even, were all them saying, oh no, it's not an immersive sim, it's not an immersive sim, it is something else. They instead try to pitch it as a bit of a Far Cry-like game in terms of there being small open-world missions, and then the progression loop of a looter-shooter outside of those missions. Now, this game was first announced in 2021 at the Xbox Bethesda Showcase, only a few months after that acquisition completed. And rather fascinatingly, a few things for this game did change, right? So this is evidently a game that had been in development for a fairly significant amount of time prior to that acquisition going through. And before that, before Microsoft got their hands on it, a PS5 version was initially on the cards, and there also appeared to be an in-game shop with microtransactions. Thankfully, the in-game shop and microtransactions is no longer a thing, and I suppose when you think about the critical reception of this game, you think about some cut-down features, I maybe wonder if this is a bit of the sunk cost fallacy at play. The idea that, hey, the game's pretty much done. It would take us years to do something else. We want this team freed up to go and work on other things, so we may as well polish up this old project that was greenlit under ZeniMax leadership, get it out the door, and then get Arkane Austin moving on to something else. Now, this comes from a really interesting era from ZeniMax, right, from Bethesda, because this is about the same era of greenlighting that would have seen Fallout 76, Wolfenstein, Youngblood, Cyberpilot. I mean, man, Youngblood, bit of an iffy prospect, awful in single player, fared quite a bit better in co-op actually, as was its design, but still, I think a bit of a misfire overall. Deathloop, Ghostwire Tokyo, and Hi-Fi Rush. And these are kind of all experiments, a little bit outside of the norm in terms of building co-op versions of like existing titles or maybe experimenting with genres. And overall, you definitely see some mixed success here. Now, remember that with the in-game shop and microtransactions being cut out, I think we can quite clearly see that this was Bethesda wanting a form of live service loot shooter, right? And they went and thought, I know. The people who made Prey, an immersive sim, they shall do our loot shooter that will be a live service. Which, I mean, to any of us is going to seem like a frankly bizarre and doomed to fail prospect. And done well, this can be great. Look at Hi-Fi Rush. What an absolutely joyous game. In this case, less so. It is now definitively up there with the likes of Rainbow Six Extraction as a Game Pass title. What does that mean? Well, basically, it's extremely mid, nobody would pay full price for it, but hey, it just appeared on your Xbox anyway because you happen to have Game Pass, as really any sane person with an Xbox would. And for me, it's a sad enough situation. I've really, in terms of the business model, been kind of a bull for Microsoft. I've liked what they've been doing, it's just they haven't got the games going. And evidently in this case, look, they probably could have polished this up to an 8 out of 10. But evidently they decided that it was not worth the opportunity cost. Now, the pre-launch period, running up to the drama we see ourselves in, was kind of crazy. I mean, first up, this was shown off alongside Starfield, so evidently this would have been positioned as a really, really big, important game for Microsoft, which really is unsurprising, given that this is Arkane, and the likes of Dishonored it's just a game that stood the test of time. However, we've had weird things happen. I mean, there's the announcement of this being an always online experience. They've actually said later in interviews that that's something that they want to remove, but it was still present in the launch build. Then it was delayed till 2023, and then the most recent drama, of course, was the announcement that this on the Xbox Series X would only have 4K quality mode, 30 FPS with no performance mode. Yeah, that is what they said here. It's 30 across the board, 60 FPS will be added via game update at a later date. And this leads to a funny situation where, look, a solid 30 that is very well optimized, where your frame timings are consistent, that's probably better than something that's just moving between 35 and 55, right? As can happen with a poorly implemented performance mode, which unfortunately is what has happened with Star Wars Jedi Survivor, a game that I would not buy in a PS5, but if I did have it in a PS5, I would actually play it on the quality mode, because it actually is more consistent than the performance mode. Now, of course, the idea of Microsoft's most powerful console ever not being able to run this game at 60 FPS, that did not go down well. I will say that this is almost certainly more to do with the game than it is anything to do with the console, right? I think that's absolutely the case. Absolutely, we have had games from Arkane, such as Dishonored and Dishonored 2, that have had pretty severe launch issues in terms of their performance. But once again, it comes down to opportunity cost. They evidently weighed things up and said that 60 FPS, that's something that they can cut. Now, does that mean that they perhaps have the statistics and they see, oh, would you look at that? Most gamers don't use performance mode on our Xbox. I would then counter that by saying, yeah, but the default effect. If you default to quality mode, that's what, in many cases, most people will do because they don't really go through settings, right? And it's just like one of those things in the EU and in the US, organ donation is extremely popular. However, it is opt-out in the EU and opt-in in the US. So you actually end up with radically different participation rates, even though across both populations, it's a very, very, very popular policy. So I'd say to Microsoft, guys, maybe 30 FPS, maybe you're overjudging it because it in many cases is the default. And actually, if you gave people the option and they could actually feel it for themselves, they would prefer 60. But that's not the only weirdness. We, of course, have got the launch embargo, which was very bizarre. So the game was releasing simultaneously worldwide overnight at 1 a.m. in the UK for us. But the sort of usual Bethesda embargo of 1 day was in place. And from what I understand, this was not the best review process, to say the very least. But ultimately, the way that embargo worked out was that this game was available for Americans before the reviews went live. Now, actually, there was one site that did post their 4 out of 10 review early, and then ACG posted their review in progress video, which had a title that certainly didn't look good for this game. They also accidentally posted that early. They posted at 11 a.m. instead of 11 p.m., which is quite the whoops. Now, all of this was pretty damn rough. We had Microsoft managing to friendly fire their own Twitter banner in their very large frenzy of getting any of this content pulled down. Because obviously, if you're in a situation where the game's out, it's been heavily marketed, there is no OpenCritic page or Metacritic page, and Americans can buy it, America being a massive market for a game like this, you can obviously see that, for Microsoft. So when you actually look then at the critical reviews, nope, they're not good. 65 top critic average, 27% of critics recommending. I believe its Metascore was 62 when I last saw it. And overall, it just is a game that is not coming together. Do bear in mind there are a number of in-progress reviews here. But overall, the AI is essentially busted. It was described to me as aliens, colonial marines. So yeah, I think you know that that's not particularly good. And this just pretty much means everything, like enemies, pathfinding, engagement. ACG had a time where they ran into these PMC enemies, and they were just standing there shooting at the floor. That really shouldn't be like that. And overall with the enemies, for a lot of people, it's not really clear. Is this an alien colonial marine situation where the AI is literally broken? As in, a config file has the incorrect value, and that has broke the AI. Yeah, if you didn't know that, Alien Colonial Marines is actually a significantly better game than if you played it anywhere near launch, literally because they shipped it with broken AI, and the AI is immeasurably better with the fix. It's a pretty crazy situation. Or is it not a bug, and the AI in this game is just that bad? But regardless, the overall picture here is one of a game that just doesn't come together. And for me, that's really emblematic of a, square peg round hole situation, where Arkane Leon have made masterpiece games like Prey and Mooncrash. And now you're getting them to make something that is very different, very outside their wheelhouse, and quite frankly, a game with lots of systems design and things that are meant to really promote that ongoing engagement that were initially concepted as being a part of a live service game with a, with a shop. Obviously that got canned, but again, think about what sort of impact that would have had on the overall design and development of this title. So in addition to just being a big hodgepodge, broadly, and I think the most consistent thing we have skimmed through pretty much all of the big reviews, it's just that the game does not have the creativity, ingenuity, and very deeply, handcrafted, traditional Arkane immersive sim stuff. I think what this was maybe supposed to be was, as Arkane described it, with a few of those Arkane trademark bits of polish and creativity, but ultimately, it's just fallen over on its face. I mean, here, a multiplayer Arkane game is not an inherently bad idea, but Redfall often feels like the wrong vehicle for the studio's strengths. And that's why I don't know what I'm going to title this video, but it'll be something along the lines of, why did you make them do this? You could have just had another brilliant game. I mean, it's like, imagine if you put Respawn Entertainment on making a loot shooter instead of doing, like, a Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and I know it's had issues, but, like, the core game itself is actually pretty damn good, at the very least Fallen Order. It's like, yeah, you could have a really good game that plays to a studio with strengths. Or you could decide as a business person at ZeniMax, we We need a looter shooter with live service elements. Let's just get those developers to do it. Completely disregarding the strengths of the studio, right? That just really feels like it's what's going on here. Now, that being said, there are some things with some of the sound design and parts of the tone that people have liked. I mean, here's an example from Eurogamer where Christian was saying, I'd say there are some good bones here. The tech seems to be creaking, and some of the ideas, the loot and other assorted Destiny-isms, might possibly have been imposed from above. But he does speak to there being charm, and that it's much harder to patch, the fixes in after the fact, as in, this game will be remembered for its launch, and people maybe won't be willing to come back. And that really is the issue. I think people in this can see the bones of maybe a setup where, left to their own devices, they could have done something well, but it's those Destiny-isms that just seem to exist because of modern video games, rather than the game designers think it will be best for the overall experience. As for PC Gamer, after Tyler put 40 hours into it, it's not great, folks. So that's the headline. And here's what's rough. This is not the immersive sim I'd hoped for, and I'm afraid it's not much of a co-op FPS or RPG either. Redfall has let me down regardless of the genre expectations I bring in. A co-op FPS like Left 4 Dead. There are not enough enemies or enemy types, and the world is big and empty. A single-player Fallout-style RPG. Every gun feels the same, and half the skill tree is useless for single-player. A survival horror FPS. The vampires aren't scary or dangerous, they're loud and annoying. A hero FPS. Abilities have long cooldowns and don't meaningfully interact with the world or enemies. A story-focused FPS. The science gone wrong narrative presented like an audiobook because Redfall's characters are barely characters. Redfall is exactly what I worried it would be, a lifeless multiplayer shooter without any of the playful, systemic creativity of a single-player Arkane game. After around 40 hours with it, I'm not sure I'd even recommend it to Game Pass subscribers. 77 gigabytes is a big download for an FPS this bland. I mean, that's rough. And in some of our connections, this will only take 20 minutes, 30 minutes to download, for those of us who are a bit more lucky. Maybe an hour, but rough. And as for the public response, well, ever heard of console warrior bullshit? Now, in fairness, you can see some of the console warrior stuff. I mean, if you are Team Xbox, and it's weird, because it's like, in my heart, I naturally gravitate towards Xbox. But I then look at PlayStation and it's like, well, I cannot deny what they've got. That's all great. And yes, maybe, like with The Last of Us, it's a total shit show on PC. But hey, like, you look at those Sony first parties and you have to say, fair play, Sony. This is great compared to what's going on over here. Now, of course, the thing with this as a sort of console warrior thing, or console war thing, is for the team at Microsoft, I don't want to say that it's not their fault. I mean, it is. They did acquire this company and publish this game. But, they kind of inherited this, and I think they evidently know it was going to go down like this. You see, one thing that happens before any game comes out, and this is maybe a bit of a how the sausage is made thing. So mock reviews are a very common part of the game publishing process. Here's a really good example for ours. Our initial mock review was between 75 and 85. Or I'm thinking, no, it was between 75 and 80, if I remember correctly. And that's basically where the publisher will actually commission professional reviewers to go in and review the game, and then give a range of scores. So most of the time, a publisher publishes a game knowing roughly where it's actually going to land in terms of its critical reception. Like for us on Pale, it ended up being spot on. And this score, I would have liked it to have been higher. Unfortunately, some launch issues and a bit of a bug snafu that rolled into like the early launch fortnight, probably dragged that down. Those issues are now fixed. I think our recent reviews are 94% in Steam, but thankfully 90% recommended the game, which I think is the most important number. So we knew though, like, okay, at its core, what we've got's good. We can be happy. If, okay, there's Redfall, just happens to be here. 65-25, that is not what you want. But this will not have been a surprise to the people publishing this game, because they will have commissioned mock reviews, because that's a standard part of video game publishing. And I think whenever we get into the public response, it's one of those things of like, publisher, you knew this would happen. There is no way that you didn't know this would happen. What disconnects within your company allowed for this to happen? And ultimately, that's why stuff like this happens. I have to assume, again, it comes down to opportunity cost, where they said that a Redfall that gets to be a week on OpenCritic with a 65 top critic average and only 25% recommending. Look, they evidently thought we could maybe put another year of development into this and however much that would cost. And maybe these numbers would look really good. And maybe the team would, the team would be happy and everything would be great and it would get more sales. But they decided, no, we can put it in Game Pass. It will not get good critical reception, but that's fine. It'll go in Game Pass. The extra year of development time put into this game literally does not make financial sense. And perhaps they're right. Perhaps this is a game that at its core never should have happened, because ZeniMax were absolutely on that crack pipe whenever they decided to go ahead with this. You then look at Steam. 29%. Yes, 29% on Steam, which is not good. I think one thing that you'll find with Steam versus the likes of OpenCritic, your Steam score is often closer to critics recommending. And ultimately that's why, you look at, say, Rotten Tomatoes versus Metacritic. Your Rotten Tomatoes will generally be like a bit higher. Just because it's about like, hey, should you put your time into this? And ultimately that's the thing that matters the most. But that's brutal. So ultimately, this is just a tone of massive disappointment and rather an appreciation that Arkane are limited to doing what Arkane does. I don't see that as a bad thing, but Arkane, they were never really going in there with the humongous sales. I think Deathloop did pretty okay for them, but traditionally speaking, like, Dishonored was a big success. Dishonored 2 did actually disappoint in terms of sales. Now, again, on PC, it had a pretty rough launch. Maybe that doesn't factor into it as much in the long term, but with this being framed as like, oh, it's Arkane's like big game, their big game that will expand their audience, that is evidently not happening. And to be honest, this is not a Jedi Survivor situation, because this core game doesn't really work that well. It's not a case of fixing some bugs and performance issues, stuff like that, and this being a way better game in a month. The problem is a square peg round hole, right? So what's next then? What's next for this game? There will be a patched in performance mode, so there'll be that. They've also promised that this will be the most supported title Arkane has ever made, even though it has no in-game store or further monetization. We have plans for additional guns, costumes, monsters, characters, and more that we can't talk about. We have a strong year of updates, and it's all either in the current game or will be DLC. We'll try to do it as fairly as possible. Which, I mean, hey, sounds good, but ultimately, this isn't the game they should have made. They probably know it. Microsoft knows it. Reviewers know it. Customers know it. Everyone knows it. That's it. This is uncontroversially controversial, if you know what I'm getting at. Yeah. That's the situation. If you'd like to see our launch coverage for Jedi Survivor, you can check out yesterday's video, and of course stay tuned. On the 4th of May, we will have a major update for The Pale Beyond that actually reworks entirely a core game system, which will really change up how you actually experience playing the game, as well as a way for you to transfer your saves from the free demo that we are going to be launching right into the full game. And believe me, like, it's a generous as fuck demo. Okay, that's my promo done. Take care. See you next time.